Hello, and welcome to Michell Consulting's webinar series for Michell University. Today we're going to be talking about Infor FACTS, the accounts payable electronic payments. As an overview, if you have vendors that accept electronic payments, their invoices can now be selected and paid either electronically or by a paper check. You can modify an invoice to be paid by check, electronic transfer, or wire in individual payment selections. The Payment Selection List program optionally prints payments made by electronically and separates those made by checks. The new Electronic Funds Transfer Submission program allows you to process electronic payments. Invoices flagged for electronic payments are consolidated by vendor and submitted for approval. Vouchers are optionally printed with electronic payments. So let's take a look at how this works, this other option. First of all, we're going to talk about some setups that are new in Infor FACTS. We're going to go into System Management, System Security, and look at the user code file maintenance. You can see here on the Security tab, a new field has been entered here. Approve AP electronic funds transfers. You would select this. This allows access by user to use this new feature. There's also some major changes made in the bank file maintenance. So if we go into our banking system, bank file maintenance, we call up our bank, we can see here a new tab, AP electronic payments. This is where we would set up the bank for electronic payments. You can have a password. You can set your class for ACH entry class. You can post to the bank rec by batch. Here you would set your path for the file company and the email remittance information. And again, FACTS will allow you to keep track of the payments. It's also available in the bank inquiry. So you'll be able to, when you inquire on your bank transactions, you can separate your bank transactions to see the electronic payments. Some other changes we did are in the accounts payable. So we're going to go now into the accounts payable module. File maintenance. And in frequent file maintenance, we now have in the check print control the option here, vouchers for electronic payments. So what you can do is, again, you can set, if you want, one of the options, if you want to have a paper trail, you can set the voucher for the electronic payments, and you can have it printed. This is a new option in the system. Another new option that was entered is for the vendor determination. So here we have the vendor EFT entry, and in here is where we set up the information for that particular vendor. As we know from our standard FACTS, we can do an F2 for search, or search all our vendors here, or we can do F3 or search here to see the vendors that are already set up. For purpose of the demo, we have this one vendor set up, so we'll take a look at this. And again, here you see the information for the individual customer. So you can see the setup. So if you want to have consumer payments or combine the payments, you can add them here. You can do your default payment type. So we can do an ACH, a wire. You can even leave it as a check. Leave a wire for this demonstration. Remittance. If you select remittance, you can print the remittance. You can email the remittance. You can even fax the remittance. If you're going to email, again, here would be the information. So you would select the person to get the email and the subject matter. You can see here, if we open this one up, we have our information. We have our routing number for the bank that this vendor uses, the account number. We can flag this being the primary account if the vendor has more than one account. We can put the description of the bank account, the type of bank account it is. It's a checking account. and whether we want to send a pre-note and modify that. So this is the main setup. What we do is once we set this screen up, we can see then how the system will generate the electronic payments. So in our standard accounts payable, we're going to go into the payment hold selecting. We can do our payment selection by date. We want to go here. Again, we can see our separation of payment types. So we can select a selection if we want to do all or wire transfers. We can also do it in the individual, and for purpose of the demo, we'll use the individual selection. So we're going to go ahead here and select our vendor. You can see that there's one payment already entered for a wire. It has not been posted yet, so it's still on the system. We can see if I filter. So for example, if I look at already paid and wire, you'll see that will come up. If I search here, I can do my settings. Again, standard facts. So we can see here. So let's go ahead and let's select this one for payment. We have this one here for, let's select the first one. Again, we're going to do our standard pay. We're going to have it paid. Click Done. And we can go to the payment selection list. So we can do the print separate. So here we can go in and we can look at our printing. And we can see that we have our vendor. Let's go in and select another one. Let's select a regular vendor. This vendor is not set up for payments for electronic funds transfer. We're going to go ahead and we're going to select this one. We're going to look at our payment list. So now we see the two. We see them combined. We didn't ask for the separation. So we see this one here is going to be a check for vendor V100, and this one is going to be a wire, vendor V101. If we want to separate that, we can select print separate. And now we get a break. We can see our paper checks, and we can see our electronic checks. So the paper check is going to behave the same way. We're going to, after we do our selection, again, we have the same features. We can unselect our payments if we wish. We can hold and look at the hold list. Again, standard facts. Now we go into our checks, and we see something in the checks now. We look at checks, we have the electronic payments, we have our EFT submission, our EFT approval, and our payment batch status. So we look here. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to approve this. And you can see V100 is not set up for EFT, so it's going to skip it. Now we have our submissions. Our next step would be is after we do we submit the information for payment is the approval. In this program, we authorize the users of electronic payments that have been submitted. Approving a payment means that the user wants to process the payment in the next batch to be sent to the bank for ACH, or is ready to manually create the wire transfers. So we're going to go into the approval. We're going to select our bank. And we can see here we can approve. We're going to approve this one. And we can see that we're approving it with the date. We can also reject it if we wish. We're going to go ahead and approve both of these. We can go ahead and process, once they've been approved, we're going to process our payment date. Right. Payments have been processed. You can see now we have no more payments. They've been processed. We look at the payment batch status. And again, we can see our wires. You can see that this first one was completed. And you can see these two were created. Again, if we see this one, if we highlight this, again, we can accept. And again, once we accept this, we cannot undo it. We accept it. That means that we confirm that the payment went. I'm going to print this. And we're going to go ahead and accept this one. And our backup. And we're done. Now on our payment register, and like with standard facts, we can run our payment register. And again, we see here, we see the electronic payments, we see the batch, we see the two we did here. We look at our general ledger distribution. And again, we see our cash and our payables. We say yes to update. And now we've done our updating. So let's review that, see what we went through. We started off with system management. We went into our user code file maintenance. We now have a new option on security. Approve AP electronic funds transfer. We set ourselves up to be the approval. We go into the banking system, the bank file maintenance. We have a new tab, AP electronic payments. And on this tab, we can go ahead and we can set up our password. If we want to put a password on the electronic funds transfer, we can set to post to the bank rec by batch. Here we would determine our path for our files, our company ID, again, our default emails, and we see our numbering system. So you can see that we've done wire transfers and also batches. Another option we can set is in the check control file maintenance, how we want to print. Now we're going to go into accounts payable. File maintenance. And in the infrequent file maintenance, we have our check print control. This indicates whether you want to have the vouchers to print for electronic payments can set that up here. We have this option. And in the file maintenance and accounts payable, we have this one here to set the vendor EFT entry. This screen, we can select one we've done. Here we would determine for our vendor their bank information. So again, here we're going to set up for this vendor the default type. In this case, it's a wire. How they want to receive the remittance. For purpose of the demo, we're printing, but we can email and fax. If we set up the email, here we would enter our email information. If we're faxing, we can set for the fax, for covers, subject. Here is our routing information. We edit this. We can see here we set up our bank or the vendor's bank routing number, the vendor's bank account number, the name, the type, which is a checking or savings account, and the pre-note status. Once we set this up, we can now, for this vendor, we can do electronic funds transfer. So we go into our standard facts. We have our payment hold selection. As we know, we can do payment selection by a date range. We can also do individual. Again, for the purpose of the demo, we're going to do the individual. So here we would go in. We would select our vendor. When we select our vendor, we decide to pay. You can see by default, it's coming over as a wire. And we can see the information here. On our payment list selection, we now have an option to print separate. What this will do, this will separate the paper checks from the electronic checks. In our check processing here, we have the standard for our regular paper checks, and we have the electronic payments. We have the submission. This is where we would submit the payments, send them to the bank, make sure they get processed correctly, create the file. So you can see here we're selecting our bank and our branch. Here we click OK. And you can see that vendor was not set up. We did process our vendor. Now they're in submission. Once they have been submitted, they need to be approved. This is typically confirmation from the bank. So when we do get confirmation from the bank, we would go into the approval. We would select our bank. And again, we have the option of approving it or rejecting it. You can see here it's not been approved. We can go ahead and we can approve it. When we approve it, we see the information here. And then we can process. We process with our payment date. Click OK. And now we can see the payments have been processed. So you can see now there's no more payments to be approved. They've all been approved, and they've been processed. The payment batch status allows us to go in. Again, we can see our batch status. We can see that these have been completed. This one has been created. So, and you can see it has not been finally accepted. So this is our batch status. In here, we accept. If we select accept, it sets the batch status to accept and sends or prints the remittance to be sent to the vendor based on their preferences. Remittances contain the same information that is on the check, voucher, EFT number, fax vendor number and name, and so on. If you reject, sets the batch status to rejects and sends the payment in the batch back to the ETF approval program with a status of submitted. You can either indicate that the batch was rejected or you can resubmit. So let's go ahead and reject that. You can see how we rejected it. We can go back through. And we can see it again. So what we've done is we're going to start the process. We can now reapprove it. We approved it. It went. For some reason, it was rejected. So we can start the process again. So we can now approve. We can process. So we can see all payments have been processed. And we can go back to our batch. And again, you can see here that it created another transaction. Originally, it was rejected. Batch number 4. So now we sent it back, we fixed the issues, and we recreated it. So again, like a check, since we haven't posted yet, we can still have the ability of making that. Now we realize that whatever the issue was has been corrected. The payment went. The vendor has accepted it. So now we can go ahead and we can accept. Again, we can, in this case, we set to print as a default, but we could email or fax. We're done. The final step would be to run the payment register. And again, we're going to see the 2 batches because we did create 2 batches. We created batch number 4, which was rejected, and we created batch number 5, which was accepted. So we don't lose our audit trail. When the batch gets rejected, it's maintained in history. So we can see the information here. Again, we print our GL distribution. We can see our effect in general ledger. And we're going to say yes to update. We've updated. If we look at the inquiry screen, and we call up our vendor, and again, we can see here, we look at our check history, we can see that these were wires. We can see our corresponding numbers. It will still say in standard facts in the open docs that when we run our end of period update, they will be moved to the paid docs. So that concludes our session today on Infor FACTS' accounts payable electronic payments. Again, this is a new feature that's in FACTS. There is some setup required. The new setups are in the system management under the user security. Here we can set our user, give him access under the Security tab. We now have this right here to approve the AP EFTs. We also have in our banking system, in our bank file maintenance, we have a new tab. Here, our new tab, the AP electronic payments. This is where we would set up the information for this corresponding bank. Okay, our directory path in fax to save our files to submit to the banks. And if we look at the accounts payable, we have two options here. If we go into file maintenance, in frequent file maintenance, under the check print control, file maintenance, we have the option here, vouchers for electronic payments, if we would like to print them or email them. And if we look at the file maintenance and accounts payable, we have a new screen, which is the setup for the vendor EFT entry. This is where we would set up our vendors and their corresponding bank information. So in this example, we have vendor V101, and you can see here that we set up their information, the routing number, the account number, and so on for the bank. We can also go up here for this vendor, the default payment type, so they're going to get wires versus checks versus ACH. How do we want to have the remittance? We can print it, email it, we can fax it. If we choose to email it, we can fill out the information to send it to the person at the vendor. If we choose to fax, we can set up our fax information here. So that's the setup involved. You have to set up a user who has the authority to approve. You have to go into the bank. You have to set up on your bank account under bank file maintenance the information. You need to set up an accounts payable under the vendor EFT entry, the vendor's bank information. And in the payment process, there have been some enhancements to pick up the information. And the payment selection list now has an option to separate the printed checks versus the electronic funds. And in our checks, we now have information here. What we would do is we would submit the payments. Once we submit them and we get approval, we can approve them. And then we go into our payment batch, and we finally flag them as being processed and paid. And then the standard payment register will pick up and do that. So once again, that concludes our demonstration today for Infor FACTS electronic AP payments. This webinar is being recorded. It'll be available on our website. You can visit us at www.michellgroup.com to view it. And once again, we thank you for your time.